Hello everybody and welcome along to a brand new video today where I'm back with the classic Doctor Who reviews as we reach the end of season 7 of Doctor Who, the first season for John Pertwee as the third Doctor. It's Inferno. So yes, I think it's fair to say this is a fairly highly rated story generally within the fandom, and on this occasion I definitely agree. I think this is another absolutely fabulous story. A 7-parter, so again quite a long one, continuing this trend that we have in season 7 where you have 3 consecutive 7-part stories, but again this one doesn't feel like it drags loads. There is maybe one episode in there that could be lost. I think it's episode 5 or 6 where hardly anything happens, but through most of this story it feels like things are always developing, the plot's always changing, and just opening up the whole parallel universe idea just really gives so many possibilities and opportunities to be able to use in this story. So yes, of course, that's the main sort of interesting, I guess, idea that's incorporated into this story, is the idea of a parallel Earth that we explore. The first time this is seen in Doctor Who, and I think although now in science fiction generally is not necessarily an overused trope, but is a very commonly used trope and everybody knows about it. Back in the 70s I think it was starting to be used a bit, but it certainly wasn't as common and well known. It did seem like something a bit different and a new idea to try out, and particularly as I say, it hadn't been done on Doctor Who before, so I thought it's a great opportunity to just kind of explore different avenues within a story, give the main characters the opportunity to play their sort of evil, darker versions of themselves, which I know that Nicholas Courtney and Caroline John really enjoyed playing an evil version of the Brigadier and Liz in this story in the parallel universe. I think they both said it was their favourite story to do, just because they had that opportunity to be a classic pantomime villain style character rather than just the sort of usual, well, for the Brigadier, nice military guy that he tends to be. And I think the other key thing that a parallel universe gives the opportunity for, particularly in a story like this where it's all about the idea of drilling into the Earth's crust and seeing what's going to happen when they hit the crust. Will it be the end of the world and what's going to happen? And the great thing is that with the parallel universe we can actually see what happens. They're able to do it. They're able to destroy the Earth because it's a parallel version. So rather than getting a kind of a classic anti-climax where it really is when with 5 seconds to go they stop it, like they did in the real Earth in this story in episode 7, it gave us the opportunity to really explore what is the effects of drilling down into the Earth's crust, then seeing how it sort of just destroys the Earth, essentially tears it apart, and you get all the lava and everything, and it gets quite dark really when you see sort of people that are burning to death. Essentially we see a few sorts of just civilians burning to death. There's massive lava flowing towards all the main characters in the parallel Earth. It's yeah, quite a dark story I think in that side of things, but also very well, just as I say, gives that great opportunity to explore what really would happen, and being able to visually see that, which just keeps it really exciting I think throughout this story, and just gives more story to be able to tell. I think occasionally there's little bits where it's sort of, you get the same scene in the parallel Earth and the normal Earth where they're kind of covering the same sort of ground, so there's a few moments like that in this story where you didn't really need to include that scene because we've already seen it in the other Earth. But apart from that, I think it works really effectively. For me, I felt like there is a clear transition between each of the, when you're going from one Earth to the other, you've got that weird sort of cross-dissolve, kind of weird sort of fading across the screen effect, and the sort of sound effect they've got as well to try and, in most times, to try and indicate the change in world. And I didn't feel like I was getting particularly confused by that. I was always able to follow and make sense of which Earth we're supposed to be in, and at what stage we're at in terms of the sort of drilling and everything that's going on. I think as Terence Dicks describes it in one of the many documentaries, this kind of ticks off the other box in terms of an Earth-based story you can do in the idea of a mad scientist, essentially having done the sort of alien invasion style plots in some of the previous stories. This is now the mad scientist story with Professor Stallman, who is the stereotypical mental crazy scientist dude who has got to a point towards the end of this project where it's just like he just has to do it. Like there's no other option in life for him than making sure this project happens. He's invested so much of his life into it that even if it all goes wrong, he doesn't really care at this stage. He just needs to do it. And then obviously we start seeing him getting affected by this weird green goo stuff that appears around the drill head, which is always, which I think the whole kind of Primord they are officially called in the credits, but are never credited on screen as the Primords. So I'm going to call them Primords because that's what it says in the credits, and I think that's what is explained on TARDIS Wiki and things like that. But yeah, I felt like as a plot point, it wasn't maybe necessary to have them in there. It padded out the episodes a fair bit and just added another sort of dynamic to the story in terms of these sort of weird, creepy, converging sort of alien thingies that you turn into when you touch the goo or get touched by another one, and all of this, and then having to sort of defeat those as well. The idea of defeating it with the cold sort of fire extinguisher and coolant it doesn't need to be there, but I don't think there's anything wrong with it being in there. I think is the way I would describe it. Like, it doesn't detract from the story, it also just doesn't really add anything to the story. I think it just maybe, I think in most parts I'd say, just helps pad it out to 7 episodes, which I think there's nothing wrong with, personally. But as I say, I do think this story could have sort of stood on its own as purely focusing on Professor Stallman and the end of the world when they drill into it and the parallel Earth. I think that would have been enough, but I don't really have any qualms with having the Primords in there as well. For the third Doctor, for Jon Pertwee, I thought this was a great story for him, having to sort of getting pulled all over the place into this parallel Earth, having to try and convince them all that, and realising that he can't do anything to stop this happening in the parallel Earth. As much as usually it's a bit of a change from the Doctor's character trait to a degree, certainly at least in future stories, when the Doctor always tries to find the solution to stop everything and stop anybody dying, no matter what Earth or universe or whatever that it's in. But in this story, from very early on, he sort of, once they've drilled through the crust and then the end of the world has begun, he's just accepted, that's it. I can't do anything about it. I can't take them back through to the normal Earth because it will destroy the universe or something. Something along those lines, the massive paradox, that whole idea. Which probably does make sense, but it's just interesting to see that sort of point of view from the Doctor, that almost kind of helplessness, kind of given up Doctor to a degree, who's just focused on getting himself back to the Earth, and that he's having to give up on helping anybody in this universe. I thought that was an interesting kind of point of view for the Doctor to take in this story. As much as it makes sense, it's, yeah, as I say, not what we always see, so I thought that was quite intriguing. Certainly I think this is a very strong story in terms of all the performances from all the sort of main cast. As I said, giving the opportunity for Caroline John and Nicholas Courtney to play evil versions of themselves is fantastic. And the Brigadier, well, the brigade leader, the evil one, who just seems to get, his performance kind of gets a little bit more and more hammy and more over the top as we go through this story, and once we're getting very, very close to the end and he realising that it's nearly the end of the world, he starts sort of shouting away and shooting away and punching people, and it's all, you can tell he's completely kind of lost control of the situation and can't deal with not being in control of things. And so sort of when he gets to that point, he just completely loses it. He can't deal with anything. He can't deal with the fact he might die, and has to kind of go renegade and go and try and force the Doctor into taking him and everything. And it's just great to see. It's a really fun, I'm sure it's so much fun for Nicholas Courtney to play, and I think it works really, really effectively in this story, and just showing, and I think it's quite a realistic sort of feeling for somebody to have. I feel like if you're put in that situation, for a lot of people, if you're put in that situation when you know the world is ending and you are about to die, but there's a dude here who has said he can get back to the normal Earth and save himself, naturally you're going to try and well, a lot of people would try and force him to do that, to take him with you, because you don't want to die. So I think it very much fitted. I mean, hats off to Liz, Liz's alternative universe character, who is willing to kind of let the Doctor escape. She's kind of got a little bit of good still in her. She's not turned as completely opposite as the Brigadier does, as the brigade leader. So I think that's quite nice. And yeah, I think it just gives quite a realistic portrayal of what it might be for somebody, particularly a military person, in the end of the world. Of course, this story also features the conclusion of Liz Shaw's storyline as she leaves at the end of this story. Well, she just doesn't appear in the next story, more accurately. The production team decided that having somebody as clever as the Doctor didn't really work as a companion so well. They felt it was not a character you couldn't really identify well enough with, and wanted to go back to the more archetypal screaming young girl who just is scared of everything and needs the Doctor to come and save her, essentially, which is what we see a bit more of with Joe Grant in the following season and for the next 3 seasons to come. And I think it's a little bit of a shame. It does feel like Liz had a little bit more to give during this, sort of for a future season, I think it's fair to say. She feels a little bit underserved, and in particular not getting a proper sort of exit. You just kind of see her having a little chuckle at the end of the story. It's nice that the episode does finish with a shot of her rather than somebody else, as it is her final story. I think at time was kind of coincidental, because I'm not sure how fully they'd made the decision to get rid of her at this point, but I think it's just a nice way to round off the story. But there's no denying that she is a little bit underserved in this story in particular, and doesn't really get the ending she might have deserved, I think. So that's a little bit of a shame. But as a story, I think this wraps up season 7 absolutely brilliantly. It kind of concludes a very, what is a comparatively quite dark season of Doctor Who. I think it's maybe a season that they couldn't have kept on. I think they couldn't have kept on with the stories being this dark, with the sort of very adult themes, and as we say, sort of seeing people dying and civilians being killed and things like that. There's a lot of darker moments throughout this season, right from the sort of the Autons appearing in the first story and just shooting people, and that's quite scary. Maybe not as dark, but quite scary. And then some of the concepts with the Silurians as well. There's a lot of sort of heavy moral dilemmas and stuff in this season as well. And so personally, I think it is quite possibly the most consistently brilliant season of classic Doctor Who, where I would probably rate all 4 stories at least an 8 out of 10, if not higher. So I think it's honestly one of the best seasons of Classic Who of Doctor Who there's ever been. It's just so consistently brilliant. But I can also understand why they didn't want to continue in exactly the same vibe they did with this season. I don't think it would have worked over a longer period, but as a one-off season, I don't think many things match it. In terms of Doctor Who, it's just such a cracking watch from start to finish. But what about you guys? What did you think of Inferno? What did you think of Season 7 as a whole? Is it one of your favourites? Are you not so sold on it? How about Inferno? Does the parallel universe idea really enhance the story? Are you not so fussed? I'd love to hear what you guys have to say down in the comments below. Other than that, guys, remember to hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here, and I'll be back again very soon to review the next story, Terror of the Autons. But I'll see you then. Goodbye.